video so I can see you, especially for the beginning of the meeting here, where we'll just see who all is here and how things have gone so far as well. And then we'll kind of dive into the notes. So again, I've chatted the notes. You can use the link there, or it's in your calendar invite. You should all be new fall 2021 math or computer science tutors in either the lab setting or individual tutoring, or both of those, and we'll talk about those. This training is meant to serve all of those groups, so it's kind of some general ideas. You've already gone through some general tutor training through the Ask Office and some of our startup meetings as well. But this is kind of to give you an overview of more of what would be like the pedagogy or how to work with students, some things to watch out for, some things to make sure you do, and also to answer your questions and kind of give you a start into this semester. So we like for this training to come a little bit into the semester so that most of you have already had a little bit of taste of this. Some of you have not, but those of you who have, how has it been going? Have you kind of, yay, I see some couple thumbs up, that's good. Are you doing okay? Do you have any questions? How many, kind of raise your hand if you've had some sort of like tutoring experience? So either worked in math lab already, or worked in CS lab, or you worked individually with a student. Okay, awesome, that's really good. So any questions yet that have come up, or logistical things, or things that surprised you? Some of you either came to math lab as students or never did, or came to CS lab as a student or never did. So sometimes your first exposure to our resources is as a tutor. So any surprises, anything that you're like, wow, I didn't know it was going to be like this, or questions you have, or anything that's come up so far? No? Okay, few head nods. Okay, well, I want to try to equip you as much as we can, but what you're going to find out is just by being a tutor, you're going to learn a lot as well. So we're going to talk about some of the resources you have available to make sure you know about those, but you're also going to learn a lot just by tutoring. And so your experience will kind of help to make you a better tutor. Also, so maybe we'll just start getting into the resources so I don't get ahead of myself. So I'm going to share my screen and go over to the resources. Let's see. On this handout, and you can kind of follow along. I'll kind of highlight where I'm at, but so I'm on this resources section. Again, this is linked from your calendar invite, or I chatted it. This resources section is just to show you kind of you're not there as a solo person, even though it might feel like it sometimes if you're in a room by yourself tutoring students or on your own individually. Know that you've got all of these resources available to you. So first of all is just some of the logistical help. You may not know this, and this is something you should actually just try. See if you can go to that link and you can actually open it up. If not, shoot me an email or one of the Math CS Lab managers as well. And they can make sure that you get shared with this folder. But in this folder, you can find a bunch of different resources. So one is this checklist. So if you're in either Math Lab or CS Lab, this checklist is meant to be kind of a central document for you that helps you to kind of know what all the resources are and where they're located. So there's some quick links up above. Oh, that's interesting. We lost them. This kind of is a good document for you all to just read through and make sure you understand, and ask a tutor if you have any questions about anything in this. But this is meant to be a resource for you because there's just so many things to kind of keep track of as a tutor. So we wanted to make kind of a central document that we keep up to date. So if there's anything that doesn't make sense here, ask another tutor and they can help you. And also just look through some of these resources so that you may learn a little bit more about Tutoring and Tutoring Well. Then within that folder, there's also the first meeting notes or any other communications that we have. So in this communications folder, we keep emails that we have sent out to you. So like the startup letter that we sent, and then we sent to Math Lab only some extra things here. So we'll try to keep communications in that folder, the checklist we talked about, and then course folders. If you're a math tutor, those are good for you to know about as well, because they tell you how to get answer keys and things like that. So this document here, course folders and answer key directions, gives you an overview of as to how to use all of those answer keys. So take some time to kind of learn your resources that exist in that tutor folder, and let us know if you have any questions about anything or have trouble accessing any part of that. Then just know that the profs are a part of your team as well. So they really want to be helping you and resourcing you also. So if you are working in a lab context, be reaching out to the professors directly. If you have questions that come up even while you're tutoring, often they'll email you back within the session, or it's good for them to know you had a problem, for example. So emailing profs about anything that came up during your tutoring is really great, because then students also know that you cared enough to connect with the prof. So for example, if everybody was struggling with a certain problem in an assignment, or they were unclear with some directions on a coding assignment, for example, those are great things to email to the prof, because then the students know you cared enough to contact the prof. The prof is thankful because they want to know where students are struggling. So use the prof as a resource as well, both to answer questions and also to communicate with them about any problems that are happening amongst a lot of students. Then other tutors, we do some videos that we might bring out for you later this month that are senior tutors, when they're kind of leaving, we say, give us your best advice for being a tutor. And over again, they say that they learn by watching other tutors. So find some tutors that work with your particular courses and just kind of be observant, watch them, see what they're doing, see how they work with students. And you'll learn a lot from, like I said, just tutoring, but also by watching other tutors who have had some experience tutor, because you'll learn some little nuances, even phrases that they say with students, or how to leave a student, gracefully, that might be kind of latching on to you, So just various things like that you're going to learn by working in the lab. So pay attention and feel free to ask questions about tutoring as well, because they're there. The lead tutors are there because they're experts and they have been around for a while. So learn from them and interact with them and learn a lot just by watching them. The Math Lab and the CS Lab are resources that we also just want you to be aware of. And this is in the context of if you are working with an individual tutoring link up. If you ever get linked up with a student, you'll see that you have great flexibility for when you set up your hours. But one pattern that I sometimes see is that these students are kind of like, okay, I had to use Math Lab, or I had to use CS Lab for an X number of weeks before the Ask Office would say, oh yeah, we think you really do need an individual tutor. At that moment that they get the individual tutor, then sometimes they just stop coming to Math Lab or CS Lab. We don't want that to happen. We want Math Lab and CS Lab to continue to be a resource for those students. So when you set up any individual link ups, make sure that you pay attention to the Math Lab and CS Lab schedule, and you do not overlap your times that you meet during Math Lab or during CS Lab, because we want them to be using that resource in addition to you. Another common strategy that I've heard from several tutors is that they also tell their student, hey, come on Sunday nights from 7 to 8, I'm working then. It just gets them to use the time that you're in the lab as well as a supplemental time to the time that you're spending with them individually. Number 5, if you work in particular with Math for LED, Pre-Calc or Calc 1, just be aware that this resource exists. We have something called an ALEX course that's made for those 3 classes. So if you're working with a student, for example, in pre-calc or in Calc 1, who is just, you can tell that like they're tracking with you on derivatives, but wow, their algebra really is terrible. It may be that they have some gaps in their background. Some of that you're going to be able to help them with as you work through that, and you have your tutoring sessions, but you really want to be tutoring towards the course and not spending a lot of time going over the course that preceded it. So this is something that's set up, that's an online course that students take a little test at the beginning, and it assesses where they have deficiencies, and then they can work through that on their own to shore up those things. So be aware that that exists and recommend it to students, especially if you find either in Math Lab or individually when you're working with them that they could use some help in shoring up those skills. And I'm a good resource for that. If you're like, what was that thing? Just email me and I can help you link that student up to those resources, or there's a link given there as well. Then know that I'm also a resource. So I'm over both Math Lab and CS Lab and also individual tutoring. So reach out to me if you run into a unique situation. So I've been doing this for 30 some years, and I'm amazed that new situations come up all the time. So something that, never happened before. And all of a sudden a tutor has a new situation. For example, one semester we had one student who would come to Math Lab always kind of get claustrophobic and kind of freak out during the session. So we actually, changed how, that part of the room was set up for that student. And we've had other unique situations that sometimes I even reach out to someone like Ruth Nelson, who's an educational psychologist, that works in the Ask office to try to figure out how can we help this student or what's going on in this tutoring relationship. So if you have anything unique, or maybe it's not so unique, but you just have a question, shoot me an email and we can either continue a conversation over email or set up a time to talk if you're running into any difficulty with a student. Then just also know that all of these other resources exist through the Ask office, both with people and appointments and also with content that they have on their website. Sometimes you're going to be working with a student and it may not be that they are having trouble with the content, but it's more that they have trouble with study skills or with test taking issues or anxiety or something else that's going on. So just be aware that you're working alongside this other whole team of counselors, the Ask office, that are very willing to work with students and help students with any of these issues that may come up. So refer students to the Ask office and just be aware that these other supports exist. So I gave you kind of this piece to online materials. Sometimes you'll find a student that maybe you've been working with them, they've been tracking along with you, and they take a test and then they fail it. You're like, oh my goodness, what happened? And it may be that they have some test taking anxiety or other issues going on. So if you come to a place like that, the first thing is to say, oh, do you know you can go to the Ask office and talk with somebody about that? So you can set up an appointment at the Ask office. And I always say the office across from the library, because most people know where the library is. So direct them to that resource, but sometimes you'll get people that are a little resistant to that. So if you kind of sense that, then you can say, well, there's also some online materials. So there's handouts and resources on their website that are listed under various topics. So maybe it's time management is a problem, or maybe test taking. So there's some outlines there of some materials that they can just read for themselves online as well. So let them know about both of those resources. A quick way to Google that, if you don't have, this link, is just to do Ask Study Skills Resources, and actually bringing that up and showing it to them might get them more willing to use that, or maybe just sending them a specific link on, oh, here's some time management skills, or here's some test taking tips, or things like that will sometimes be helpful as well. And then you also share with them your study skills. You might remember that that was one of the tutor interview questions that I asked you, is what are your study skills? Students are going to really appreciate hearing from you what has made you successful in the course. So sharing your study skills is another really good thing for you to be doing as you work with students. They'll really listen to you and want to hear what helped you to succeed in the course. Okay, we'll go on down to the next sections, Part C, preparation. So Part B was you have resources, so use all those. Part C is preparation. We're talking about that both you and the student should be prepared for your tutoring sessions. So you, the tutor, what you can do if you get an individual link up, so you'll get an email from the Ask Office if they want you to consider linking up with a student. After that, go ahead and email the student's prof right away and say, hey, I'm going to be tutoring so-and-so in your Calc 1 class. So say what the student name is, what the course is, and just say, is there anything that I should know as some background? A lot of times profs will know because they had to approve a tutor before a tutor is given to the student. So they may tell you some things like, oh, this student actually was ill and missed, 2 weeks of class, so we're trying to catch them up. Or I've noticed this student is not being regular with reading their text or coming to class or whatever, but they might be able to give you some more background that will help you to be able to work with that student. You could also ask them for a syllabus or other resources that might help you to work with them as a tutor. Tutors could also be added to the Moodle course as a tutor status. So it's something that's called a tutor status instead of a TA. So it kind of protects, like you don't see grades or anything, but you're able to see a course. So if that would be helpful for that particular course, you can ask for that as well. Then there's a whole document here that if we were in person, I sometimes would hand out this sheet. This is just something for you to be aware of if you get a one-on-one link up. This document has all kinds of things in it for just some tips that you can think about when setting up one-on-one tutoring situations and what to think about. So some of you aren't going to ever have a one-on-one link up, so I'm not going to go there right now, but I want you to know that that resource exists. So if you do get a one-on-one link up, go ahead, open that up, glance through. There's some ideas there for how you can work individually with students. The second thing for preparation is the students. So we want students to be prepared and to utilize your services really well, both for Math Lab and CS Lab and also for working individually. If students were to hire a tutor, they would pay a lot of money. And so sometimes since they get that service for free, they use it a little bit more flippantly than they should. So hold them accountable, make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain. If they do get a tutoring link up, there is a whole thing that the Ask Office will go through with them. So the Ask Office says you need to be going to class, doing your homework, doing your reading, doing all these things before you work with the tutor so that your tutoring sessions can be effective. So hold them accountable to that. Make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain. And if that's a problem, talk with me about it, because we don't want to be using you. You're a valuable resource. We don't want to be using you on a student that's not working hard, especially if there's other students that are waiting in line to get a tutor. We'd rather use you for those students who are holding up their end of the bargain and doing their part to work hard in the course. So in the previous pre-COVID days, we had these Math Lab brochures. These were the guidelines that we put on them. But it's kind of how we're feeling. A lot of times you're such good students, you kind of almost take responsibility for their learning. But remember, this first one is a good one. They're responsible for their own learning. So don't take that, shoulder that on yourself. You're there to help them and guide them through that, but they really need to be working hard and doing their part to promote their own learning. And then this one too, have them try things, before they're just asking for help. And for individual link ups, encourage them to try to have gone through all their homework with a first pass first before they meet with you, so that they'll find where they run into trouble and can utilize the time that you have together in a better manner. Okay, attitudes. Any questions on part B or C? We have a whole section on attitudes just because attitudes are important. Um, and you're going to have a variety of attitudes as well. So you're going to get some students that come into the labs or use our individual tutoring that are just there they're like the type A, and they just want to make sure they've dotted all their I's and crossed all the T's and everything is perfect, you know. So you'll get somebody like that. They're really gung-ho. They want to learn. They're working hard. And they're just, you know, right there with you. You'll also get some people who are super anxious. So maybe they just have to take this course. They're in intro to programming because they're a math major and it's required, or they're in Calc 1 because it's required for some science course that they're going to be taking. So you're going to get some people on all ends of that spectrum. So just be aware of that and be there with this purpose in mind. This first one with this GGSS has kind of been a mantra that we've adopted for both Math Lab and CS Lab. Anybody know what it means? You're new, so you might not have caught it yet. We said it at the startup meetings, but there was too much in those startup meetings. It means glorify God and, anyone know the last part? Oh, I better write it in here since it's not as well known yet to you. So this is kind of a refocusing mantra we've had to be like, what is our true purpose? It is to glorify God and serve students. What does that evoke? It evokes humility, kindness, you know, all the fruits of the Spirit. Those kinds of things should be flavoring how we tutor, and our utmost purpose is to glorify God in all that we do. So if you can have that as kind of your centering point and your attitude as you come into a session and as you serve students, that kind of brings you a long ways. If you kind of recognize that they are kind of brothers and sisters in Christ that you are trying to help along the path that they have. I was amazed when I heard back from some of my fellow students in my Bethel days. One was pre-med back then. Now she's a physician, and it was easy for her to memorize. So she loved biology and things like that, but she just could not stand calculus. And she said, I would not be a physician today unless you helped me through calculus. You know, it's like, wow. She's like, you know, med school was easier than calculus, you know. So it's amazing sometimes the impact that you will have on students. So recognize them, that we all have different strengths, that your strengths are not higher, not to be more prideful than others, that they have other strengths than you do, and come alongside them and serve them well, and you will go far. So that kind of relates to this next one as well, to connect with the student, let them know you're a real person. I had a problem once with one tutoring link up that they just could not relate to one another, just because the student kind of felt like they were here and the tutor up here, and never the two could meet. So make your labs comfortable places, you know, be kind, be welcoming, say, hey, how's it going, you know, and make them know that you appreciate them as a person as well and serve them well. But again, it's this balance of be professional as well. So don't spend all your time chit-chatting, because there may be someone there who really needs to just get in and out of the lab. So balance that, be very kind and welcoming, and you know, make it a comfortable environment, but also be respectful of people's time. We once had a student say, you know, I got childcare for this math lab hour, was a single parent, you know, and so it was really important to me. And in that case, the tutor had been late, you know, so it was a big deal to her. So just recognize that people are coming into the lab with very different backgrounds and attitudes. So be ready to serve them well. Handle negative comments about the course and the instructor. this is something to be really careful with, because you may have had these courses from the same instructor. So Lily could come in and say, oh, I know that Conrath, wow, she is so hard. I don't even know, why does she expect so much? I can understand you. You can complain all you want. I complained, so she would never do that, but I'm picking on her because I had her. So you can maybe commiserate well with that student, but we never want to have negative comments about a professor, about a course, or anything like that. You want to always try to speak as positively as you can about things. So, for example, discrete, it's a notoriously hard class, so people may complain, but you can kind of flip that to say, I know it is a challenging course, but wow, I really learned a lot in this course, and I think you will too. So there's always a way that you can kind of flip and redirect. So if you do find that you are getting, consistently bad feedback about something, tell the student to go talk to the prof. So it may be something that actually needs to change. So maybe a prof is doing something and they don't even recognize it's a problem in the course. So encourage the student to go back to the prof and let them know about what's going on and the difficulties that they're having in the course. Because a lot of times the prof might not know, and it might be something that could change. Then also, if the student kind of continues to complain or things like that, you can direct them to me or also the department chair, who's Dr. Gossett, with any kind of persistent problems that may exist with students as well. But in general, try to kind of be like, oh yeah, kind of affirm them like, yes, this is hard, but it's going to be worth it. It's really cool. You're going to see some applications that are so neat, or this is going to get you to the next step so that you can do this, So find ways to be positive about the courses, the instructors, and the material, and then try to, as quickly as you can, redirect towards the material so you can get going on that. Have a positive outlook. Again, I kind of already talked about this a little bit, but the last question that I asked you in the tutor interview, anybody happen to remember it? Too long ago last year. The question was, what did you like about the courses you would like to tutor? And then it's really fun because you all basically go kind of light up and are like, oh, I really enjoyed the whatever, the application to this, or I really enjoy solving puzzles, or I really enjoy this, or it was really challenging, but then I made it through and it was so cool to see this. All of that stuff, that natural enthusiasm, is what we're looking for in tutors. And it really is contagious. It's been fun to see some of the feedback from students that say, wow, those tutors were great, and they actually helped me to even feel better about the course. So be enthusiastic and let that kind of rub off on the students that you're working with. Okay, next one is session. Some of these things in the session are going to be formally done. Like you will make sure you do these things, and others of these things are going to kind of be in bits and pieces. If you are working with students individually, you will do this more formally because you're working with a student kind of steadily. You can kind of control what's going on and how you interact with them. So you'd want some of these frameworks and ways of working with students. But a lot of times you're going to be working in labs. And that may be very inconsistent. You may be getting a student that just comes in, once here and there. Or others of you are going to start to get a little following. So like Alex, you'll for sure have a following in discrete, it happens, you get your group there, but others might get little groups too. We see little groups kind of form that they're really consistent. They find, oh, this is useful. I'm learning a lot here. And so they keep coming back. Those are the students that you can do a lot of this with as well. And others, you're just going to have pieces of these things. So some of these are just tips for tutoring and what you should do. So this first one, review, sounds like you're kind of stuttering, but it's meant to be 2 reviews, the kind of 2 bookends of your session. So if you're working with groups of students, so like even in discrete or with some students in an intro to programming class or a little group of calc students or whatever, it's really nice if you can kind of try to organize them. That's why we encourage students to come at the beginning of the session if we can, because then you can do things like saying, you know, what's everybody having questions on, and kind of write up on the board, oh, numbers 3, 5, 7, whatever, so that you can kind of group people together and talk about problems in a group. So that's a good strategy. But also I'd wrap some of this, what I'm talking about in this handout, around that, just kind of diving into the problems, and slow down for just a very short review. And do this more formally if you work individually with students. What that means at the beginning is you're just kind of putting the context of where are we at. And I'll talk in like Calc 1, because I think most of you have had Calc 1. So say you're in Calc 1 and you are talking about derivatives, and you say, oh, okay, you know, we have learned what? The product rule and the quotient rule, and it looks like today you're looking at the chain rule. The product rule obviously was for products. The quotient rule was obviously for quotients. Anybody happen to know what the chain rule is about? Composition of functions, okay? So what did that take me? It took me maybe 30 seconds, but it's a very helpful review to just kind of get the context of where this is at. A lot of times, like in statistics, for example, there's just so many different tests and things that you do. It's so helpful if you can just kind of give them the context. Where are you at? Where does this topic fit into the list of topics that you have been working on? So that's what that first review is. It's kind of laying the land, telling people kind of where you're at and what is the context for this topic. Then that review at the end is more something that you would pull out of them. So this might be hard to do because people kind of are trying to get in their last questions, but this might be at the very end when you say, okay, we've only got like 2 minutes left, and then math lab or CS lab is closing, or in your tutoring time, you're kind of wrapping it up with an individual student. You say, okay, let's just kind of quickly in a minute here, put this topic into the context again, but this time you pull it out of them. What are the 3 rules you used for differentiation? And you try to get them to say product rule, quotient rule, chain rule, and you're like, great, you know. And then what were each of them used for, or how are you going to know when you need to use them? And then you do that. And then you might want to dive in a little bit more into today's topic, chain rule. So kind of what was our big thing? Take the derivative of the outside function, you know, go in, multiply by the derivative of the inside. Good. Okay, you know, and again, that just took about a minute. But students actually appreciate when you do some of that summary. It helps them to kind of understand. They were kind of lost in all those details, but now you kind of put that into a nutshell and help them to understand what were kind of some of the key ideas. How did that fit into the rest of the context? How can I kind of pigeonhole that topic? Next one, check work, don't do it. It's hard. The stance I had is like almost like you're holding your hands behind your back. I kind of remember this as a parent when my kids would come at like maybe 10:30 at night with like, oh, I have these questions on my math homework. And you're like, I want to go to bed. You know? So it's almost just like you're just tempted to just go like, here's how you do it. And you just show them. And sometimes you're going to feel that way as well. It's like, it's just easier to do it. Sometimes you will have to show a problem to them or write out some pseudocode to give them some beginnings. But as much as you can, try to pull out everything from them. Ask leading questions. Find out where they're having problems. If you don't lead them through the problem, you're not going to find where they're having the difficulty. So if they can start it and you can even say, hey, you know, what does this problem say? You know, what is it that you're trying to find? And ask them some questions like that. It may be that they don't even know what the problem is, you know, or what they're trying to make the computer program about, you know. So as much as you can, try not to just be barreling through and showing things, but instead pulling as much as you can out of them. Explain concepts and nurture understanding. Sometimes they just want to fly through things, and you can tell that there's like a glazed over look, or they're just like copying things down. Maybe if you're working in a group, you see, wow, that person over to the side, they're not contributing at all. They're just kind of writing down the answers. Try to make sure that you're pulling in all students into the conversation, that you're slowing them down, you're making sure that they understand, and you're really making sure that they're not just kind of copying down and following what other people are doing. So slow things down a little bit. They'll appreciate that you do that, so that they actually do understand it. If you ever need to kind of check them about that, you say things like, you're going to need to know this for the exam. That sometimes gets them to wake up and say, oh yeah, I guess I do need to understand this. So slow them down, make sure that they're understanding things and not just copying work or going through things quickly. Number 4, model your skills, but be open to other methods of learning. So for example, in our calculus sequence, we have something called the rule of 4, where we look at things verbally, numerically, graphically, algebraically, in all these different ways, just because people learn in different ways. And you've heard about different learning styles and things like that. But as you're working with students, you're going to find out that some people are verbal learners. You can sit there and talk. Like some of you are doing well with this Zoom session because you can learn when you're listening. I would die unless I was taking some notes, because I have to like write as I like every time I listen to a sermon, I have to be writing, or if I'm in a lecture, I have to be writing, because that's how I learn. So find out how people learn, especially if you're working individually with them, and shift if it's not working. So they sometimes can even tell you, you can ask them, how do you learn best? Do you want us to be talking about things? Do you need to be writing things out? Do you like things graphically and you can show pictures? Try to find out from them and shift if it's not working to a different way of working with them. Don't worry if you can't solve a problem. So just know that good tutors do get stuck. So the worst thing you can do is to actually pretend you do understand what you're doing and go through and lead them astray. We've had that happen in the past, where a tutor has given wrong information to a student. And then the worst case that happened was, what do you think happened then? They went back to their dorm room. They told their friends all how to do it the wrong way. And then they had a test the next day. And they all did it the wrong way on the test. This is what you want to avoid. Don't do that. So if you ever come to a point, and you will get stuck, be honest with them. Say, hey, wait a minute, I need to look at this a little bit more. And then this next step is really important. Model your own study skills and use student resources. So there's a whole handout there about more things you can do when you get stuck. But I'll tell you an example in this next point. Just using those resources can be enough. So for example, the very first semester we had math lab. People were kind of figuring out, what is math lab and what is it for? And there was an upper division econ stats student that wandered into math lab. He sat down and everybody kind of was like, whoa, the other tutors went away and I happened to be there. Guess what I hate? And you wouldn't think this. Don't all mathematicians love statistics? No, I don't. I hate stats. I'm sorry, but I do. And so I'm not the stats person, but I sat down next to the student and they said, oh, I'm stuck on this problem. And so I looked in their book and I said, oh, okay. Well, so you're trying to look for the heebie-jeeba, whatever it was. And I said, so let's look back a few pages in your text and find the definition of a heebie-jeeba. So we looked back a couple pages, we saw the heebie-jeeba. I said, oh, the heebie-jeeba, it depends on the pickle, whatever, and it depends on the whatever. Do you know how to find those two things? And they're like, oh yeah, I do. Oh, and look over here as an example for how you could do that as well. The guy thought I was a great, econ stats person, which I obviously was not. I've never taken an econ class in my life and I hate stats, but what did I do? I used the resources well. I used the student resources. So don't forget about all those resources. Remember that students have notes from their class. They might have a handout that's there. They might have some resources that are on Moodle. They might have their book. For example, last year I heard this from one of the tutors. They were like, oh, wow, you had a great handout. I don't know why students weren't using that to do your Calc 2 work. You know, it's like, oh yeah, ask the student, do you have any resources that we can look at, or look in the book and do the things that you do as a student when you get stuck on a problem. And often that can help to lead you to the next step that you need to do to get that done. Poor Ruth is updating our video as we speak. I'm not going to go there, but you can go there later. She'll have that link fixed so you could look at that video if you like. So be careful is basically the bottom line with all of this. You are going to come to places when you get stuck and can't solve a problem. Don't panic. Instead, just kind of take a pause, start to use the student resources, pull in another tutor, pull in answer keys and things like that. But be careful with your use of answer keys also. Don't be so dependent on an answer key that you aren't kind of working through that process, because you modeling those skills of using resources is also very helpful for students. Them seeing that, wow, the textbook is helpful, or wow, these handouts from class are helpful, will help them to be able to get unstuck the next time that they have problems with a problem as well. So model being good students and use those resources. The last point here is just your new tutors. We love that about you because you've got a fresh perspective. So you've got fresh eyes on all of our resources. If you see something that we could improve, please speak up and let us know. Shoot me an email if you have an idea for maybe something that we could do better as tutors in general, a resource that might be helpful to tutors, some way that we could be interacting with students better, how we can advertise our services is something where I'm always looking for help. So if you have ways or ideas that you have for that we could advertise our services to students that would get them to come, let me know about your ideas with that as well. But let us know about your perspectives on all of our services, and if you see some things that you think could improve them, speak up. And also, if you have questions, shoot me an email, talk to other tutors in your labs, and they're all happy to help you as well. Any questions or comments as we close off our time? Well, thank you for hanging in there. We kind of view you as being fully trained now, and that does not mean you're really fully trained. All that means if you checked off the boxes. So like Vicki loves you in the Ask Office, and you've done everything you're supposed to do. But again, you're kind of on this journey. You'll continue to improve as a tutor as you continue to work in our services. And we really appreciate each one of you. You're going to connect with students in unique ways with just how you interact with them. So we appreciate the care that you give to students and the difference that you make in their lives. They really are appreciative. We see this at the end of the semester with their comments on assessments, telling us that, you know, some of them said, I never would have made it through this class if it weren't for, and they name people. You'll become special to them as you help them through courses as well. So thank you so much. Let me know again if you have any other questions that come up later on. But I appreciate you coming to today and continuing on through this semester as a tutor. So take care. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.